Welcome everyone to a special fireside with the Black Girl Doctor. This is a special day for us as we are filming this as part of our first YouTube series entitled The Real Story of the Strong Black Woman. This is part one of our three-part series, and today we will be discussing the blessing and the burden of strength. I am Dr. Taisha Caldwell-Harvey. I go by Dr. Tai. I'm a licensed psychologist and the founder of the Black Girl Doctor. And I'm joined today by two psychologists from our team, Dr. Jacquelyn Johnson and Dr. Akilah Reynolds. And I will let them introduce themselves in just a minute. But before we do that, let me share just a couple housekeeping items. We have a planned structure for today's session, but we are going to also allow space for your questions. So please stay engaged and be encouraged to ask questions as things come up for you in the chat. So now, without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Akilah Reynolds. And because we are virtual and we can't hear your applause, if y'all can help me out by giving her some hand clap emojis or a fist bump or some hearts in the chat to welcome Dr. Akilah to the virtual stage. Dr. Akilah, in addition to your work at the Black Girl Doctor, you also researched the effects of the strong Black woman and Black women's mental health. Through that work, you co-founded a research-based organization, the Strong Black Woman Wellness Collaborative, to encourage Black women to redefine strength in a way that supports self-expression, self-care, and social support. I want to give you the floor to introduce yourself, and I'd love it if you would also share a bit about what you learned about strength through experience by watching the matriarchs in your family.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Ty. Dr. J, it's always great being with you. And thank everyone for joining. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I grew up around strong women, and I think because I was so immersed in it, I didn't quite realize it. Strength was just sort of normal for me. It wasn't until I got into grad school that I really started to think through that I was actually a strong Black woman, even though it sounds weird, and that it had an effect on me. So I think the number one strong Black woman that I grew up with was my mom, and she did any and everything. Like, she did it all. She could do everything. She was a superwoman. She, made money. She was a working mom. She was always there for me, my sisters, her husband, my dad. But then she was also there for her extended family. So I grew up with my mom really being there for everyone and anyone. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to see that perhaps the way that she was doing strength and the way that I was taught and learned wasn't necessarily the way that I could do strength, that at some point it was actually having an effect on me that wasn't helpful to my wellness as I grew older. So my research kind of started this off. I was studying in graduate school stereotypes about Black women and was studying the strong Black woman and a couple of other stereotypes. And it dawned on me in my advisor's office, like, oh my gosh, I'm strong and this is having an effect on me. And that jumpstarted all of the research and all of the work that I've been doing so far to really help Black women to own their wellness and redefine strength.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, a little glimpse into your world and your ability to, I think it sounds like there is a journey to awareness of what you had learned and seen for yourself. And we are definitely going to get more into that as we continue this conversation. And I want to turn to Dr. Jacquelyn Johnson. If y'all will please help me welcome her to the virtual stage in the chat, maybe give her a, hey girl, how you doing? Dr. J, you have been with the Black Girl Doctor for just over a year, but you've also dedicated your research throughout your career to the study of Black women and specifically how we shift the various aspects of our identity based on the context that we are in. In addition, you have provided professional trainings, speaking to the unique ways that Black women express symptoms of depression and the ways in which our mental health needs are often overlooked. If you will please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you saw strength modeled for you, and what did you see modeled as strength in Black women as you grew up?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ty and Dr. Akilah. Yeah, it's so great to be with both of you all today. And for all those who are attending, welcome, welcome. I already kind of have the sense as we go through this that there's going to be a lot of overlap in what we share. And I would be interested to hear what resonates for you all as well in your journeys and stories. But very similar to Akilah, in that grew up in a matriarchal family, right? My grandmother ran the show. It was her world, and we were just living in it. There was this kind of messaging that we work hard, right? That you be independent, especially financially. I think that was just such a key point in my family. Like, you don't depend on anyone, and there was no expectation that others would be there to support you. So you had to do it for yourself, right? You kind of make your money, you become independent, and you make your life for yourself. But then there was also this aspect where you were self-sacrificing, right? Everything was about family and about your children. So I saw my grandmother and my mom and my aunts work at jobs that they hated, right? Work at jobs that were super hard, but it was about the family. So I'm willing to endure this for the sake of my children, so that they could have, and not go without. So there was kind of this sense of, family above all else, and so having this strong commitment to family as well. But then also this idea that you give, to not only your family but the community, right? And so if anyone was ever kind of in need or fell on hard times, you would go to my grandmother and she had a meal for you, right? Or she, something to kind of help you out. And so it was kind of like this messaging that you're always supposed to be available and to meet every need, no matter if you're tired or not, right? It's kind of like, if there's a need, you show up to meet that need. And so that was such a key aspect of my growing up as well.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Growing up, I don't remember my maternal grandmother because she actually passed when I was pretty young, but I remember the narrative that she worked herself to death, right? And she actually passed from cancer, but throughout raising her four children, she worked two jobs. She worked the morning shift, she worked a night shift, to raise her kids. And she ignored and actually kept secret her health as it began to fail until she was pretty much incapable of working. And then when she finally did get care and go to a doctor, and actually get a diagnosis, the cancer had progressed too far, and there wasn't much that they can do in terms of treatment. And every single time I tell this story, I think it is incredibly sad and disheartening. And I also know, though, that it is actually a pretty common story in our community. And it is particularly the constant working as a priority above all else, and the actual hiding and the secrecy of pain, that is a common thread. And I want to ask Dr. Akilah if you can talk to us about what it means to be socialized to withstand great pressure. Historically, how does something like that happen? How is a superwoman identity born, and how do we end up sustaining that?
I think that's a really good question. And I find that some of the common threads, because I have common threads with your story, Dr. J, and also your story, Dr. Tai. And so for me, it's clearly something that's cultural and also communal and familial, in the sense that it's passed down from generation to generation as a means to survive. For many Black women throughout our history, especially our history in the United States, we have overcome so much oppression, and we had no choice. There was really no choice. You had to do this to survive. And I think has just been ingrained in our people that if you want to live, if you want to survive, then you are strong. And I think it's sort of an act of love that our foremothers would give to us, this thing that they had to carry us through such hard times. And so from some of the research that I've found, and I think in our common stories that we've talked about, is yes, that Black women learn to be strong primarily through their mothers and through their grandmothers, that we are taught this. In fact, in a study that I did, about 72% said that they learned being strong from their grandmothers or their mothers. And then the rest of that percentage is just reinforced by family members, by men in our lives, by the community, by society, and by media. And so I'm interested, Dr. J, do you have any other thoughts around how else this has been learned and passed down?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of, the primary messaging coming from the women, but so many other sectors of society reinforces it in terms of even, the other people in my family, so the males in my family, in terms of, yeah, you would look to, if you needed something, you went to the women, right? If you wanted to get something done, you knew the women would get it done, right? And so it was kind of like there was the expectation that, oh, the women will figure it out. And there was no kind of demand placed on the men, even in my family, to do that. So that's such a key point. Yeah.
I think what's so interesting also is that if you think about this coming from a necessity and survival, there's this conversation that needs to be had, and when are you still surviving, right? Like, is that still happening today? And I find that most of us don't even recognize when we don't need to be in survival mode anymore. And some strange things start happening when you're repeating behavior that is not in alignment with your current circumstance.
I totally agree with that, Dr. Ty. And some other points that I found in research is that 93% of Black women in one study describe themselves as strong. And I think for us, it's kind of just been adopted as an identity. So it is so hard to step outside of something that is all you've known and all the women around you have known. If 93% of us feel this way, then everyone you look around basically is this way. And how do you really distinguish when I'm surviving or when I'm living or thriving? It's just really hard to do, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to push this a little bit further and talk for a minute about this expectation of strength as it shows up as a burden, right? So clearly none of us can be strong all of the time, but it's much deeper than just feeling tired or like, I can't do this all the time. It's heavy. And Dr. J, I want to ask if you could talk a bit about the multifacetedness of the heaviness and of what we are carrying, what it actually looks like for Black women as a burden.
Absolutely. I think this kind of really reiterates what we started to talk about already, is really at its core, at least in my belief, this expectation of strength that's divorced from context or capacity is rooted in oppression, right? And so it's almost strength no matter what your level of capacity is, or even desire. Do I want to even show up this way? It's kind of like we don't even get the option to kind of opt out. It's like, you have to show up in this strength. And really what I see it as is kind of like this devaluing of our full humanity, right? And so as Black women, we don't get to be complex and multifaceted. We are kind of reduced to, like Dr. Akilah was saying, kind of, I have to be strong because I have to make it. But then that also means we don't get to be vulnerable, right? We don't get to be tired. We don't get to be overwhelmed. We don't get to be hurt. We don't get to be scared. We don't get to be lonely. We don't get to be empty. And so there's this expectation that we're always supposed to be all things to all people and ignoring ourselves and almost kind of unflinching, even in the face of pain, right? And so many times we're battered and bruised and broken, and we're still soldiering on. And even though the wounds may not be on the outside, as it was for our foremothers, we're still carrying all this pain and still expected to show up, right? At work and provide the deliverables there or show up for our children. And yet we're barely kind of keeping ourselves together. And so there really is this expectation that no support is coming for you, right? And like Dr. Ty mentioned, we suffer in silence. And that is such a heavy burden. When you think about even what Dr. Ty shared about her grandmother and the narrative that everything that you do matters more than you, right? That your life only counts if it's in the service of other things or other people. And so you are only worthy if you're sacrificing to the point of death sometimes. And I think like Dr. Akilah talked about, that's where we find our primary identity. And that for me is where things get really tricky and complicated, is when I find my strength in pouring myself out, then I become only my performance. And so if I don't perform, then I'm not worthy in and of myself. And that is really something that keeps us in bondage as Black women, over relating to this concept of strength. Yeah.
I feel like you just dropped all the gems, Dr. J. I'm picking up on a lot of these keywords, and I'm hoping those in the chat, if you will chime in on what is resonating for you as you're hearing this conversation. What are some key phrases, some things that are really sticking with you? Dr. Akilah, I think you were going to jump in.
Sorry, I got lost at the chat box. But yeah, what I wanted to say kind of along the lines of what Dr. J said, what came to my mind is this idea of kind of like stereotypes about Black women, that in some ways society has these certain stereotypes and then we kind of fit into each one of them. Like, which one are you? And from a research study that I had done in grad school, which kind of prompted my interest in the strong Black woman and how it affects us, I was looking at the Jezebel stereotype where Black women being highly over sexualized, Sapphire, like the angry Black woman essentially, and then the strong Black woman. And what I was seeing is that Black women in my study, at least, by far rejected Jezebel and rejected Sapphire. But if you kind of have to choose, they're choosing the strong Black woman. And I feel like there's this immense pressure, not just from ourselves and not just from our family, but literally from people outside of our community, that our environments that we work in even expect us to be strong, that the media projects us as strong. And it's extremely hard to kind of get out of that. And in many ways, we're rewarded, maybe backwards, but rewarded for that being strong because we're lauded for doing all these things for all these other people, or we're applauded when we're so independent and don't need anyone. And we're also, unfortunately, like expected to self-silence. And that's one of the most detrimental things that I have seen, that the pathway from the strong Black woman to things like depression is the self-silencing. It's because you're not emoting and you're not being vulnerable and you're not expressing yourself. And like Dr. Dre said, that means that you're not allowing yourself, or you're disallowed from society, to be human.
And then that is the path where this becomes way more than an annoyance, than an exhaustion. This is your livelihood. This is your mind. This is your survival in a different way, right? And one thing that you said, Dr. J, was no one's coming for you. And that's yes, right? No one's coming for you. And how alone must you feel if there is no help for you, right? You're carrying this on your own. And, I think about therapy, and, when I think about distress, and what therapy does is it helps you realign the way you're acting and behaving with reality and what is true for you and who you're meant to be, right? When we are misaligned from that, our bodies reacts and there is distress created. And so when you find us acting and behaving as if there is no help for you, no one is coming for you, when that is not actually your reality, that is not in alignment with who you were meant to be, you are constantly living in a state of misalignment, which is not healthy, and you are therefore pulled away from achieving and living into your purpose. Like this is everything, right? So now that we are talking a bit about the expectations and how heavy a burden of this is to bear, I want to shift us a little bit. And as psychologists, we know that the hardest habits or mindsets to shake are the ones that have some functionality, right? So I want you all to think about this like gambling. So even if you lose a lot, and mostly always, because it pays off big sometimes, and because that payoff is random, you can't exactly predict when it's going to happen, that addictive behavior becomes so strong and some of the hardest to shake. So even when we know a behavior is problematic, when it has this pattern of randomly paying off, it becomes very, very, very challenging and hard to change. And so when I think about, this strong Black woman identity, we have benefited from it in the past, which is part of the reason why it's hard to just say, I don't want to do that anymore, right? And so Dr. Akilah, if you can talk for a bit about how strength has historically, and this identity of strength has historically been a blessing to our people, and the ways in which it has paid off big. And then I want to ask Dr. J to jump in and talk about currently, how does this function still as a blessing for us?
Yeah. And I think this is an important question, because I take you back to grad school when I was starting to notice that the strong Black woman was not helpful in my life at that point, and that it was actually doing me harm. At one point I was like, oh, to heck with it. I'm done. Like, I don't want any parts of it. And it felt like I was going to an extreme, but then I realized that there were actually some blessings to it, and there was some cultural benefits and connections. And so I think number one, historically, and probably why it's survived for so long, like from slavery to segregation to current modern day, is because it has helped us survive. That it is the thing that we had during periods of our history when we had nothing else. That if you had that willpower to survive and to be strong, that it was going to keep you literally, for some people, alive. And we can't divorce ourselves from that either. That there's something valuable about that, and there's something that is important that can help us to get through so many different oppressive situations that we've been in, whether it's racism, sexism, classism, all the isms, wherever you're at on that identity wheel. Strength has probably been helpful for you, especially as a Black woman. And so I guess for me, I can't even imagine if Black women weren't strong, how would we be here? And how would we be here in present day for so many of us thriving, or at least doing well and living in when we've gone through so much. And I also think in many ways, it kind of helps keep our community together. It's helped keep our families together. And it's cultural. It connects us to Black women across this country. If you ask them to describe what it means to be a Black woman, strength is going to come up there. And so I think that there's something valuable when I can be here in Los Angeles and commune with someone in New York. And the one thing we have in common is our strength. And I do think that that's important, which is why I'm not on the extreme anymore of throw it all out, at least not all of it.
I think you raised such an interesting point of like, I kind of had this image in my head as you were talking, Dr. Akilah. It's like, I see Black women saying, no matter what, we gonna survive, right? We gonna make it through no matter what happens. And I think, that's why we're sitting here, because Black women, we've leaned into, we gonna survive no matter what. Even though you try to kill us, even though you try to silence us, we gonna find a way to make it, right? And I think that is such an adaptive piece. And I love the question, Dr. Ty, because I think it calls for such a nuanced kind of perspective, right? I think we can be, like Dr. Akilah is like, throw the baby out with the bathwater in a sense, but really recognizing, well, how has this served you? And so for me, I think it does serve as like a mask or this shield for many of us. And it allows us to show up in spaces that weren't created for us, right? So a lot of times I'll work with clients and they're like, well, the whole imposter syndrome piece, right? Which I know a lot of us deal with. And I'm like, yeah, because that space wasn't created for you, sis. Like you're in boardrooms and spaces that, they were not made for you. So of course you're feeling like an imposter because that's not our space, but yet you're kind of invading, right? You're kind of the first one to really be in those spaces. And so I think it really helps us to exist in predominantly white spaces or systems and spaces that, weren't created with us in mind. So whether that's educational spaces or workplaces, and it's what allows us to perform at high levels despite microaggressions and things like that, right? I mean, can you imagine, like you're on a battlefield every day and your wounds are wounds that no one else sees, and yet you're still showing up? Like how much strength does that take and fortitude does that take to do that and do it well? And so this armor, in a lot of ways, has helped us to achieve kind of our highest goals, and it's gotten us to spaces and places that our ancestors never even dreamed of. And so there is definitely, like Dr. Akilah was talking about, kind of a strength and something to be proud of in terms of how our strength has helped us kind of get through to places that, many people may have not thought that we could ever get into. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like it can be a conflict, or these are mixed messages, right? So we're saying, yes, use that strength. You have this in you. It's been passed down. And wait, you need to be your whole full self. What's happening? Don't be so strong. Can I ask maybe each of you to share just for a moment kind of how you think about that for yourself? That like, how do you balance all of those things?
I think that's a great point that you make. And that's why I think it aligns with this idea of being human, because as humans, we don't fit into these boxes the way that maybe we like to. As humans, we are very nuanced and multifaceted. And so being able to take from strength when you need it and when it's helpful for you, and being able to lay that down and say, this isn't working for me, at least not in this situation. That's kind of where I'm at now. Like for a while, I was on the other side, and I realized that there was something important for me, at least, to have this cultural connection and something that was valuable and helpful for me. But I also try to be more balanced in this, where I pay attention to my own well-being, my own mental health. I put that at the forefront, because for me, that is, if I don't feel well emotionally, I can't do any of this. Like I can't be a boss woman if I don't feel well. So for me, that's kind of how I manage it. And it's a give and take. And I think self-reflection for me has been extremely important, in the sense of I have to constantly monitor where I'm at, and being very much aware of who I am, and then use flexibility to be able to choose when, where, and how to enact strength, when, where, and how to put it down, and to be my vulnerable self.
Thanks for saying that. I know that right now we are in the midst of this cultural shift where incredibly talented powerhouse Black women like Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka are prioritizing their humanity and their mental health very publicly, right? Through vulnerability, through radical honesty. Dr. J, if you would explain to us the significance of this cultural moment where this is happening, and how might bearing witness to this happening in our culture impact the future of Black women as we think about strength?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what a time to kind of be alive and kind of witness this, on national display, international display. And you're right, for the first time for many of us, I think we're experiencing this dramatic shift, even having conversations around the narrative of what does it mean to be strong. I think for so many of us, it's been so implicit. Like it's just been something we've been living out of, and we've never really examined it. What does that mean? What does that look like? How is it benefiting and how is it hurting? And so even like us being here today is such kind of an evolution, so to speak. And so really kind of looking at strength as this multidimensional concept, and not just, I think we have this one definition of what strength is. And so what I see that's being modeled for us in real time is this recognition that strength sometimes means withdrawing, right? Sometimes strength means, sis, you need to go take a nap. Like that, and that's strength, right? Because I think we have this idea of strength means I push through no matter what, and sometimes strength means lay it down, withdraw from something, even that's something that you want, right? So Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, they wanted those things. Like they trained really hard to be, in that space, and yet they're like, yes, this is something I really want, and not at the cost to myself, though. And it goes with Dr. Kelly was saying of like prioritizing myself above all else. I matter first and foremost, and if I don't matter, then I can't show up authentically in these spaces how I want to. And so I know for many of us, it's hard to do that, because I think there's this fear too of disappointing other people. So we keep showing up because there's this expectation that I can't let anyone down. And so kind of having to sit with that, as we've seen, both of them have had to do that, right? Because choosing yourself does not come without cost. I think it's important to really say that too, right? Because we can be like, rah, rah, choose yourself. But it's hard because when you go against the narrative, there's cost to that too. So there's cost to showing up for yourself, and there's cost to kind of being the strong Black woman at all costs too. And so being mindful of what cost am I willing to pay at any given point. But really at the end of the day too is this radical commitment to you, right? And caring enough about you to establishing healthy boundaries to preserve yourself. And I think what's happening now is giving us pause and helping us reconsider, how have I been living so far? And do I want to keep living this way? Or is there a new way for me to show up as a strong Black woman, but redefining what that means, and in a way that kind of honors all parts of ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of struck me is from the chat box as it relates to Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka. And I'll self-disclose, this is my mom who said this, but she says yes. And so it allows us to do things our mother was not able to do. And my daughters can do so much more. And so I feel like we are in this sort of cultural position right now where we are more able to speak out for ourselves and to take care of ourselves. And I think these two women, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, being at sort of the elite athletes saying, you know what, my mental health is more important. They're probably able to do this in a way that perhaps people could not do in the past. The same way, if we bring it down to the level that we're all at, like we may not be elite athletes, but we're elite in whichever realm that we're in. And us being able to say no, to take a nap, to rest, to sit out for this particular match or whatever it is, it's something that our mothers or grandmothers couldn't do. And so for me, it's like such a privilege and an honor. And that I feel like I got to do this because it's healthy for me, but it's also a way to honor my foremothers and to honor my ancestors who didn't have this privilege.
Absolutely.
That's a word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's some ways of thinking that are errors cognitively, right, in psychology about how we think and move. And if we correct them, it can shift so many other things in our life. And as we're having this conversation, one that comes up for me is this black or white thinking that, I'm either good or I'm bad. I'm either strong or I'm not strong. I'm this or I'm that. And it's natural for our brains to kind of just move, like operate in that mode, but that is not true. And I think what we're talking about is that we are multifaceted. We are complex human beings capable of a range of emotions. And so to operate as if I can either do this or this forces you to make a choice that is not actually your reality. And so someone talked about, how do I get out of survival mode? And I think it requires challenging some assumptions that maybe you've been operating under for a while. Like in sessions, when I work with clients, a lot of the times, when we're talking about work stress and burnout, a lot of times I end up asking people, so what would happen if you said no, if you didn't do it? And usually what we're telling ourselves is, oh, I'm going to be fired. And I'm like, would they actually fire you? And most of the time, if you're going to get fired, there is a place of survival mode that is real, right? Like, I need to feed my family. I'm going to need to not lose my job, right? And then, but where I find the women that we're working with mostly and today is that when they think about it and do a factual assessment, the answer is, oh no, they could fire me. and it's like, okay, so how does that adjust how you can operate, what boundaries you can put up? How do you stand up for yourself and not just automatically like go to the, I must do everything that people are wanting from me, right? As we continue to think about the future of Black women's wellness, what do you think maximizing the blessings of strength and minimizing the burden could look like? And I think we're talking about this already, but Dr. Akilah, what are your thoughts just on maximizing the blessings and minimizing the burdens?
Mm-hmm. And I think in answering this, I want to check to the chat box. Danielle said, I also think that we have the idea that we have, that we can't rest because there hasn't been anyone to come behind us to help. And now we have a better understanding that we can help each other. We're not alone, and that there are some things that can wait. Self-care is important. And I think this is actually one of the ways in which we can maximize the blessing. I think there is this like amazing sisterhood among Black women, no matter where you are, and just being able to rely on each other even, or just other people in our lives, family, friends, and things like that. Just knowing that if we can't do something, there is someone there to help pick that up. That there's this collective survival, even if it doesn't feel like it. And I think kind of that's what you were alluding to, Dr. Ta, like at work sometimes, like if you don't do it, either it doesn't matter because it's not going to get done, or someone else is going to do it. But then the idea, and I think what you're talking about, we're talking about like Black and white thinking and some of our just cognitive distortions or just error thinking. Flexibility, I think, is really important in the sense of being able to use strength in a flexible way. Dr. J mentioned that sometimes strength is resting and sleeping, and then sometimes strength is pushing through, because like you said, Dr. Ty, sometimes you just got to do your job because you can't get fired. But being able to be flexible in your thinking and the way that you behave to know when you have to engage in strength in one way versus another way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's it. I know sometimes when folks kind of ask questions about, well, how do I do this? I think they're wanting kind of like, again, this black or white answer about, or this rubric, right? Like if A, B, and C, then you do D. And of course, as you know, like life doesn't work that way. It's so nuanced and individualized and personalized. But one question that I always like to ask and have my clients ask themselves is this serving me well right now? Like, or how is this serving me? Right. And that will help you kind of determine whether or not you push through or whether or not you rest. Right. And so that requires intentionality, that requires kind of this moment by moment attunement to yourself. And I think for a lot of us that in and of itself is such a radical shift, because I think a lot of us live in autopilot. I think we live off of these narratives and assumptions that we don't examine, and we just kind of do, and we don't really pause to kind of analyze or think critically about, okay, why am I doing this, right? What is operating here? Right, like Dr. Ty, and I have clients too, like Dr. Ty's, of like, if I don't do this, I'm going to get fired. I'm like, you've been at the company for 20 years, you're a high level manager, stellar record, no one's going to fire you off of not completing this one deliverable. And I'm not saying it's not important and any of that, but it's kind of like, wow, we kind of really have these kind of distortions. And so is it serving me well? Do I have the capacity to push through? Can I, do one more night of working late and then I'm going to rest the rest of the week? And so instead of kind of, we can't give these pat answers, but what we are saying and asking you to do is be more attuned with yourself. And I think sometimes that could be helpful to have someone else help you with that too. Because a lot of times, when clients come into for services, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't even know how to do that because we've been so disconnected from ourselves, right? And so sometimes it could be helpful to have somebody walk with you and teach you how to do that. And then, you kind of learn how to do that on your own. And so definitely through things like this, I think having community and conversation, just knowing that you're not alone is so huge. I think a lot of times, at least for me in my journey, I'm like, am I the only one struggling with this? Because I didn't have a lot of, Black friends in like college or grad school, like, you're like the only one. And, the higher you go, right, in any of your fields, the less there are going to be people who look like you. And so there is this kind of idea that, oh my gosh, am I tripping? I just need to push through. But if I had more community, I think that would have been really, really helpful. And that's why I love that we're here in this space today.
And speaking on attunement, as you discussed, I think that the thing that we're talking about is being in touch with your own emotions and your own body, which I think for many strong Black women, we have been taught to push all of that down and to just go, go, go. So we're actually not really aware of how we're feeling emotionally or physiologically. And that might require going out and getting some maybe professional help or being more intentional around, engaging with your loved ones or just engaging with yourself and being very clear and reflective, like, how am I feeling right now? And what do I need? Like, what do I need? Is this what I need? I like the question that you asked, Dr. Dre. So just being able to really be mindful of what's going on for you, identifying what it is you need and being okay with going to get that.
Mm-hmm. I would add that if we can be intentional about testing things that we have not explored, right? And so I think that it's scary to do things that we haven't done before. It's scary to do it a different way, but you can think about it like trying on a new outfit or something that you want to wear. And so, you can say, okay, I need to shift the way I'm doing things at work and how I put up my boundaries. It's okay to try stuff out and just see what happens. And I think that can feel a little less scary. You don't have to say, I ain't never doing this way ever again. I'm going to say no to everybody. You can say, I'm going to put up a boundary and see what happens, right? And I think experimenting with life can be extremely rewarding. I will say for myself, as I tell this story a lot, that I worked myself into pneumonia twice, starting from grad school, right? Over the years, before I finally got it. I will not do this again. When I'm sick, when I'm tired, I'm going to rest because what I really don't have time for is to have pneumonia. because that's not cute. And that will lay you out and that could kill you, right? And when I actually began testing and learned to put up boundaries, I was shocked by how everyone else still thought I was so amazing, yet I was doing so much less. And I think that is the biggest hustle in being able to say, let me kind of just explore what I'm telling myself. If I don't do this much, then I will no longer be excellent or amazing at what I do. But is that true? Like, let's see. And that has been huge. So I want to say thank you both so much for this conversation. I feel like we need to keep having this conversation more and more. But I want to transition into directly answering some of the questions that came through in the chat. And Corey is sending me some questions. One of the questions was, I think we talked about this a little bit. How do you get out of survival mode? So we talked about trying things, exploring, getting in touch with your feelings and your full humanity. And so if you need support in doing that, not being afraid to say, hey, I've never, thought about my emotions or how I feel in situations. Let me get some support in being intentional about doing that. One question is, how do you distinguish surviving versus being? I think that's a really interesting question. If you want to respond to that, like how can you distinguish surviving versus being?
I'm going to think about it from an emotional standpoint, like surviving with your emotions versus being with your emotions. For me, if I take it in water, like an example, being in water is kind of like riding the waves. The waves go up and the waves go down, but not really fighting against, just kind of being in the water. And so when I talk with clients about their emotions, at least when it comes to that, because for many Black women, we're taught to push those down, and that actually becomes a little bit problematic for us. It's like ride the waves of your emotion, that it's okay. We don't like maybe feeling sad or upset or disappointed, but that's a part of life. And so as opposed to pushing it down, you're actually going to experience it. And so, surviving maybe an emotional experience might be either pushing it down so much or like pushing through that you're not paying attention or you're not attuned. So if you're in water, you're just kind of like flopping like this or flailing in the water, but you're not actually being. And if you allow yourself to experience life in each moment, sometimes the moments are going to suck. Sometimes they're not going to feel good. But that the waves come and they go.
I love that so much. I think you're making a really important point that being doesn't mean you're always happy. So doing this the way where you're allowing yourself access to your full humanity does not mean when you're happy and having a good time, you're doing it right. And when you're hurt and sad and struggling, you're doing it wrong. It means a healthy mind is having a normative reaction to life as it is happening and allowing yourself to feel that. Right.
That's so good. And I think of survival too is your defenses are up, right? Because you're under threat. So you're surviving because there's something that's threatening to you. And that's a very different feel versus being, where there's more peace, not in the sense of absence of conflict, but even in the midst of conflict, kind of being rooted and grounded. And then Dr. Akilah, Dr. Ty was saying, this is what I'm experiencing. Yes, it sucks. And I'm going through this, I'm riding this wave, as opposed of kind of fighting something, all these kind of threats from all over. So I kind of get this sense of tension and resistance with kind of surviving versus kind of being is kind of like this releasing. And I'm here kind of with my hands open. And yes, it's hard, but I'm here and I'm walking through it.
A sense of acceptance as you're being.
Yeah.
Even when the situations aren't the best.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Another question that came in is, how can you care for yourself when you have to survive? Right. So if you do the assessment, so we're not talking about I assume I'm in survival mode. So if you actually do the assessment and you're like, nope, I'm definitely getting fired and I'm burnt out. What happens then? What is maybe one tip or a strategy that you can share for how can you care for yourself when you do need to live in survival mode? Because that is also part of our experience.
I mean, I think, for me, even in survival mode, even in crisis mode, recognizing your humanity. And that could be as something as small as, just kind of giving voice to, I'm scared right now. I don't know what's going to happen. So maybe that's reaching out to your community, like, hey, I just need to like not be in this alone, or I need to problem solve with someone. Because I think it's this idea of when we're in crisis mode, we tend to withdraw into ourselves, and say we have to soldier on alone. And so maybe something small is reaching out to your community just to kind of express your humanity and giving voice to all parts of you, even when you're scared.
I like that because I think sometimes we've learned that in survival mode, we aren't human. But I think there's a way to be in crisis and to still allow yourself to get help or to at least express that this is happening to you, even if you can't, give yourself fully over to the situation and fully emote, because sometimes you do got to muscle it up. And then reminding yourself that this will end, that you will make it through. And I think sometimes, like when I'm in crisis mode, again, just allowing myself to feel those emotions and not necessarily push them down necessarily. Now, sometimes you just got to work, but also just reminding myself that there will be an endpoint, and reminding myself possibly that in the past, when I've had these crises before and I have been able to survive and make it through. And then being very clear that when you're out of survival mode, that there needs to be a switch to something that is a little bit allows you to take care of yourself in a different way. And just taking maybe small moments whenever you can, whenever you have them, small moments.
I think that part is really important. We often think about happiness and joy as the sustained state of being, but that is also not realistic. And that what it does is joy and happiness, that stuff compounds. So if you can just create little moments. So if your day, like Dr. Akilah said, sometimes your day gonna suck, sometimes your week's gonna suck, right? But if you can create a minute where a day where you laugh really hard at something, that compounds over time and actually matters. And so, in the moments when you're in survival mode, you still do not give up on creating moments for yourself where there's levity, where there's connection. I feel like connection is a whole nother conversation we need to have a chat about, and connection with Black women. But if you don't have community, or if you feel like we don't have community, I think a lot of us feel like we don't have community when we do. But if you feel like you don't have community, or if you don't have community, you need to make some, right? You need to create community. And again, maybe that's another fireside chat for another day. In this moment right now, I actually want to thank you both so much for this conversation. And I want to ask everyone that is attending with us, if you would just take a moment to shift your attention to yourself for a moment. I want to ask you to do a little breathing with us. If you could just shift your attention to yourself and on your breath, and just give yourself a chance to take a big breath in and exhale nice and slowly as we begin to just wrap up this conversation. I want to ask you again to take a deep breath in, let it out slowly. Go ahead, breathe in deeply. Breathe out slowly and allow your eyes to just fall. If you place your hand over your heart, focus your attention as you keep breathing on your heart until you can feel it beating. Continue your breath in and out slowly, deeply. I want you to allow yourself on your next breath in to breathe in all the blessings of strength. And I want you to exhale the burden. Again, allow yourself to breathe in all the blessings of strength. And I want you to exhale the burden. Allow yourself, as you continue to focus on your breath and your heart, to visualize an identity for yourself of strength that includes vulnerability and rest and softness. See yourself living with the identity of strength that includes vulnerability and rest and softness. I want you to breathe in again the blessings of strength. And exhale the burden. I want to ask you to take a few more deep breaths in and out. And then allow yourself to bring your attention back to the space and raise your eyes. I want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing this time with us and making space to engage in this important discussion. We started with our own stories of how we learned and saw strength. Then we dove into the historical context of how we got here. We parsed out the good from the bad to this thing that we call strength. And we closed with affirming the future that we are all manifesting for ourselves and for our daughters. I'd love to invite everyone on to just share in the chat one takeaway that has stuck with you, something that has resonated with you that you will take with you. We definitely want to hear from you. And I also want to ask Dr. J and Dr. Akilah to share a final thought. If each of you can just give us one sentence of something that you hope that everyone here will take away from this conversation. And let's start with Dr. J, and then let's hear from Dr. Akilah.
Yes, and so grateful to be in this space with you all. So I think my main thing is being radically committed to you. You are worth it, and you are more, so much more than what you do.
And I want to kind of piggyback off of the "you are worth it." I just want everyone to remind themselves that they are worth it, that they are fully human, and I encourage you to embrace your humanity.
Dr. Akilah, Dr. J, thank you both so much for today. We know that change is brought about by awareness followed by action. So I hope that after today, we all leave with a sense of what we need to feel a little more whole and in touch with our humanity. And I want to encourage each of you to take an action that is in alignment with that, which will help solidify this new way of being. If you love today's session and you want more from us, there are several ways you can engage. We offer group wellness coaching for anyone who wants real strategies, community, and accountability for claiming and maintaining a life that has an abundance of love, money, and happiness. Those are our tenets here at the Black Girl Doctor. We believe we all deserve an abundance of love, money, and happiness. We also provide virtual therapy to California residents, and we send weekly newsletters and are available nationwide for speaking engagements and to deliver workshops in your workplace. All of these resources are available on our website. Corey is dropping links in the chat to all of those resources, and we hope to hear from you through one of those channels. I also want to note that if any part of this conversation was triggering for you, please utilize the triggering or just kind of brought up things that you decided that you're deciding that maybe you want to work on in therapy. Please utilize one of the therapy directory resources that we are dropping in the chat, or one of the crisis service resources that we are dropping in the chat, which are always free and available 24/7. Again, it has been awesome being with you. I want to thank you, and we hope you'll come back and join us for part 2 of this series, which is called Moving Beyond Working Twice as Hard. That is coming soon in September. And yeah, the full series will be up on YouTube shortly. And again, we can't wait to continue to engage with you. We are sending each of you blessings for love, money, and happiness.